Welcome to Praxis Journeys, where we explore the paths of today's most influential leaders in education and the real-world strategies they're using to drive lasting change. I'm Vinay Ganti. In each episode, I sit down with the people shaping the future of our schools. We talk candidly about the big issues: teacher recruitment, leadership, innovation, school culture, policy, and more. Whether you're an educator, administrator, or advocate, you'll find fresh ideas and actionable insights to inform your own journey and help students thrive. Let's dive in.
Today we are joined by Jaalil Hart and Terri Conrad from the Hunt Institute. The Hunt Institute is an independent nonprofit that brings together people and researchers to inspire and inform elected officials and policymakers about key issues in education, resulting in visionary leaders who are prepared to take strategic action for greater educational outcomes and student success. I spoke with Jaalil and Terri about how the changes occurring in education at the federal level are creating both uncertainty and opportunities for local and state education agencies, and the continued importance of both quantitative and qualitative data to inform our decisions to best help students succeed. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Well, thank you for joining today. Before we dive in, we'd love to just give you a chance to introduce yourselves. So maybe, Terri, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm Terri Conrad, and I'm the Deputy Director of K-12 at the Hunt Institute. I have been at the Hunt Institute just a little over a year. I spent the last 20 years or so working in K-12 education, mostly out in Texas, and I'm excited to be joining the conversation today.
Thanks, Vinay, for having us. Hi, everyone. Jaalil Hart, the director of the K-12 team at the Hunt Institute. Likewise, I have a background before moving into policy space and the practical space as well. I was a kindergarten teacher for almost 10 years and spent some time in the MTSS space as well. So great to be with you.
Great. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with the Hunt Institute generally, did one of you maybe just give a high-level overview of the organization, goals, and sort of, at least from our perspective, why you all are, I think, especially today, a pretty unique organization in the context of policy?
Sure. We were founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, who we in North Carolina and really across the country refer and regard as the education governor. He really championed high-quality public education in North Carolina from prenatal through higher ed. So at the Institute, that's what we do. We work with policymakers around the country to really understand those critical issues and timely topics with their state-specific context. I think that's the biggest piece. The biggest and most important piece of what we do is we really work with state leaders to understand their state-specific context so that we can then bring in and have convenings and technical assistance and conduct some research around some of those topics so that we can support them and give them some recommendations to support the students and teachers in their states.
Right. Yeah. Full disclosure, BTS Praxis is a sponsor of the Hunt Institute, and one of the things that really drew us to you all is you really sort of walk the walk around taking that commitment to enabling and educating policymakers on both sides of the aisle, and do so. One of the things I've been very impressed with is that at all the events that I've gotten to personally attend, I at the dinners or the lunches, I'm sitting next to Republicans and Democrats and sometimes even independents who are all aligned around their commitment and passion for helping make education an actual sort of tool that states people can use to improve the lives of their constituents and their residents. So I really appreciate that. And I think the timing of today's conversation is very poignant given everything that's happening at the federal level when it comes to education. Like, leaving aside sort of personal feelings or personal opinions around the decisions around the Department of Education, no one can sort of ignore the fact that a lot of the changes that are happening, or both spoken and now some of the actions we're seeing following through on those, are going to have massive reverberations across the country when it comes to how state education associations, local education associations, state policymakers, and others navigate the education context going forward. For today, I'd love to sort of have that conversation. And I guess, from your perspectives, first and foremost, what are you all seeing as sort of the biggest sort of impacts or trends today when it comes to how the Department of Ed's sort of, for lack of a better term, receding from its sort of primacy as the arbiter of education in this country?
Sure. Terri, if it's okay, I'll start kind of high level and then I'll let you get into some of the details. And I say that and then I'll probably go into some details also. A couple of the things rather that we're seeing are that states obviously are having to really consider what it means to have local control. And then what do they then do with that local control? So that's one of the biggest things. And I think some of the things that come from that are conversations around curriculum adoption, high quality instructional materials, or HQIM, thinking strategically about assessments and standards. I'm thinking a lot about the funding piece of it and then the accountability piece. Those are all things that I think states are really, really grappling with, and rightfully so, right? I think now that the Department of Education, while not governing schools and education in states per se, has a lot of say, a lot of impact, a lot of influence on what happens in schools on a daily basis. So schools, states and districts are now having to really think about how can they support their districts and their schools without having the guidance, the support from the federal government. So those are things that the states are thinking about. And I think one thing, an example of that, I think, is around curriculum adoption. Some states are thinking about how they can adopt a curriculum, for example, that might be aligned to the science of reading, right? Or how they can we just had a webinar yesterday around quantum and STEM. How can they make sure that teachers are getting the right materials and things that they need to support students? And I think another thing around that is the science of reading, right? That's a big thing that we've been dealing with for the last probably 10 years or so, really longer than that. But how can states continue to push those conversations around as they think about moving into secondary without the guidance and the support from the federal government? I'll stop talking because I can keep going. And Terri, anything you'd add around that?
Yeah, I'd say that probably the most specific examples that I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing with states is I mean, a little trepidation, right? Because as much as people are excited that, I mean, everyone would love a little bit more autonomy, everybody loves flexibility, but that all requires capacity. And so I think people are a little nervous about where that's going to come from, because I don't think anybody thinks they've got just extra people hanging around that they can give extra work to, right? So
Mhm.
I think there's two areas that I think have really stuck out in conversations that I've had with people. One is on their data systems, right? So a lot of the U.S. Departments of Ed's role has been in data collection and that analysis, and states rely on that. Now, most of them have put together some sort of longitudinal data system, but they vary widely in their effectiveness, how well they integrate data from the pre-K side or the 0 to 5 side and the workforce and college side. So I think people are nervous about what's going to happen when and if certain tests, certain data collection on the U.S. Department of Ed side might go away and they don't have access to that. Just coming from a school district, we did not have the extra capacity. Like if all of a sudden some of those things went away, we did not have extra people sitting around with that ability to take on data collection. And if we did, there would have been a huge learning curve, right? There would have been a drop in the quality of the data and the access we would have to it until we built that system. And typically people aren't given that time to have that sort of drop. So I think people are really nervous about that. And then I would say the people who are involved in special populations work,
Mhm.
that has been very heavy on their minds. Again, having worked in the central office, like I would have loved to not have the red tape associated with a lot of the money that we got from the federal government. That was a whole headache and things that we had to deal with. But because of those things, we were paying attention to special populations, whether it's your Title III money going to your migrant and your English language learners, whether it's your Title I dollars and your IDEA funds for your special education populations. I mean, there's a reason why those things are in place. And anybody I know that works with those populations is really nervous that when states are given autonomy, the focus might not be the same. So states are really going to have to grapple with how much capacity they have to take on the same level of focus and attention to those populations.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Use the word capacity, the capacity there, and I think that's because capacity shows up in a variety of different dimensions, right? There's the capacity around just people and bodies and resources, but there's also this like cultural capacity, right? Or the institutional capacity around, a lot of the research around central offices, for example, like whether it's Meredith Koenig and University of Washington or others, it talks about how the central office historically was not designed for like instructional outcomes. It was designed for compliance driven tasks, right? And so part of what the Department of Ed sort of kind of at least attempted to do, or the intent for some of it, was to help move the needle on outcomes, or at least provide means to track data that will allow for informed methods for moving the needle on specific populations of students. And so, yeah, I think that capacity concern sort of probably plays out in a variety of different dimensions within an organization. A superintendent right now is probably very much wondering, like, not only do I have the people, but even if I had the people, do they have the right skills, mindset, tools,
Exactly.
organizational sort of empowerment is the organization even going to empower them, even if they do have all those things, to actually make that difference, right? Something as simple as like purchasing a new data tracking system. Is that going to get lost in procurement? And like, how long is that going to take? Like, what does the RFP process look like for that, right? Those sorts of things. So I think there's the conceptual and then the tactical. I feel like probably is compounding, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I think that's the case, and I think
but
that's the case a lot of times in education. I think the practical, theoretical, political, all of those things often don't match, and you have to find a way to be intentional about finding balance. So I think this conversation around what might happen with the Department of Education is really timely, but I also think it's one that gives schools and districts and states an opportunity to really think through how they can better support schools. And to your earlier point about the central office what traditionally has not been around outcomes, has been more around compliance. I think now is a really good time to strike some more balance around how can we support schools and students and ensure that they're getting the outcomes that they deserve and that we need them to have, while also making sure that we're compliant with and following the rules, regulations, and policies that we need to have. So I think right now, while it's scary, while it's hard, while it's challenging and something we've not had to deal with before, I think it also presents a really unique and cool opportunity for states.
yeah, no, I think you could have something interesting there too, which is that when the red tape becomes too onerous, that even attempts to do something that's focused on instructional outcomes becomes compliance driven, right?
Sure.
And so in some ways, theory, that might be the opportunity, which is like you mentioned, Terry, already, that the federal government's sort of role oftentimes to create a lot of compliance driven tasks. And if those get removed, can we repurpose that time and that energy to something that's more innovative and more sort of proactive around student outcomes? I think could be super exciting. The purpose of today, the purpose of this podcast and this show, the Praxis Journeys, is really to do our best to spend more of our time as much as we can on the positives and without ignoring the negatives. And so I do want to sort of like carve out, at least on the front end of this episode, you mentioned opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What are you all sort of already maybe starting to see the beginnings of people sort of taking this uncertainty a little bit by the reins and being like, you know what, like, let's actually use this to enact change or think about things differently? Are there some bright spots that you all are already starting to see when it comes to that? And we'll come back to the sort of the data accountability piece and the risks in a bit, but let's start.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I'd mention is some of the work happening in Virginia around English learners. Virginia has really taken a robust statewide approach to ensuring that divisions, is what they're calling it in Virginia, divisions and districts and schools have the tools necessary, not just the tools, but the skills and the dispositions necessary to support English learners. And we supported them in doing that work through the English Learners Network, through which we facilitate. And Terry, I'll let you speak to the details of it, because this is your baby. But really working with them to understand their school's context, their division's context, and provide a space at which the district or division leaders can work with school partners to really understand that data, think through action planning, and how can they support English learners, which then in turn would support all the students in their schools. So I think that's a really immediate response from me, something that I've seen, and I think it's based on some data that we have has been really, really powerful. Terry, I'll let you speak to that, and then we can come to some other examples.
Yeah. I would say the English Learner Network is certainly something that, it was from a U.S. Department of Ed grant. So the interesting thing about it is there has been, 2 years of it. This is the second year. And, there has been a delay in the second year initiation because of the kind of red tape on the U.S. Department of Ed side. And I think the positive outcomes that are happening because of that Virginia English Learner Network, it's an example of if the money could flow and then Virginia could go do what Virginia needs to do for Virginia's kids, great things would happen, right? And so I'm excited to see that if funding could flow to states who know what their kids need in a way that allows for timely intervention and timely professional learning. Anybody who's been in a school system understands if you don't know what you're planning for your upcoming year by really May of the year before, March, April, May, that initiative's not really going to take, you're not going to be able to have any sort of progress in that initiative for that next year, because you need that summer beforehand to be working with your teachers, working with your administrators, making sure everybody's on the same page. And so you really need the funds to be well in advance of anything that you're planning to do, because you need to actually have that runway. And I think that's where I'm really excited about some of the ways that this might actually help schools and states, is if some of that time frame gets loosened up from federal dollars, if some of that, the way that the money flows gets a little more flexible, states could do what they know they need to do for their kids, and in a way that is much less reactive. And no, everybody in the education business has come back in August and been like, so what's new now? And it gets thrown at you then. Wouldn't it be nice to know 6 months prior? Like that would be great things. I'll also add, I think what I have seen in the recent work that we've done with the Path Forward Network has really shown that states are really excited about their science of reading work and the idea of really tackling literacy for kids. And they are really trying to put in the effort to make that implementation good and right, and not swing like a pendulum like we see often happen in education policy. And I think because they are collaborating with each other, because the states are collaborating with each other, and they're really trying to help each other out on sharing resources and capacity, they are seeing that if they get a lot of stakeholders involved, like their educator preparation programs, their with their institutes of higher ed, their districts, their state departments, they can actually take a policy and implement it well. But I don't know how often have we ever really given states and school districts that much time to do that. And I think they're excited. And I've been seeing people really dig in state departments to say, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do it well and right. And we're not going to just wait till the next policy shift or the next fun thing that gets funded. Like, we're really dedicated to this and really doing this. And I think they might be getting a little bit more flexibility and autonomy to be able to dig into those sorts of things. And I'm excited to see that.
I think another thing, real quick, if I can, Vinay, another topic or idea that states are thinking around is teacher recruitment and retention.
Yeah.
And a big thing, and states and districts have always had to think about that, right? That's never been a role of the federal government, the U.S. Ed. But I think given the conversation around the role of the U.S. Department of Ed, I think states are now having to really think more intentionally about everything. And this seems to be something that states are really, really thinking about. How can we recruit and retain high quality teachers? How can we prepare our teachers and EPPs to make sure that they are day one ready? And we're seeing apprenticeship programs and different types of other grow your own programs popping up all over the country. So I think that's another thing that we've seen an increase in and an uptick in since this conversation around US Ed.
Yeah, no, I mean, from what I'm hearing from both of you, I think one of the common threads is like build the channels now, like act as if, right? Go ahead and build the strategy today. Don't wait. Like, don't wait to see if the money's going to come. Like, build the strategy today as if the money's going to come, because when it
Exactly.
does come, it's going to probably come as a wave. And like, if you don't already have the right channels in place, it's just going to flood the field, right? Like, it's not going to help you. It's actually going to overwhelm you. We kind of saw that happen already. We already sort of learned that happens with ESSER, right? Where no one had the ability to plan, and then like all this money showed up, and like districts started using it for permanent hires, even though they were told not to, because they didn't have a plan. They didn't actually have the time to put a plan in place on how to think through strategically how to use that money for outcomes in a way that when it did go away, they weren't going to have to sort of face all these layoffs and other things and reduction in headcount.
I
And
think the
so, yeah,
influx of those ESSER dollars was a really great test case, I would say, for what we're
yeah,
dealing with right now. Folks got those ESSER dollars. They hired positions. My position when I worked in my charter network was funded by ESSER dollars. So I get
right.
that, right? A lot of schools and states made plans to use these dollars in ways that were disposable, right? And they thought about how we can support students with the learning recovery and these learning needs right now. And then that money went away. So now folks don't have jobs. Some students are getting the services they needed. The instructional materials that folks used are either gone or aren't aligned with what they're doing now. So I think that's a really great test case of how we can plan better, more strategically and more long term, given this influx or reduction in whatever we're going to get.
I like that. I wonder though, like, I mean, that sort of planning and that sort of autonomy at the SCA and LEA level, that's a pretty sophisticated sort of approach.
Mhm.
I would love to sort of hear your thoughts, like, especially as we juxtapose that on the sort of the declining average tenure of a superintendent in a district, for example. So like, you all are probably talking about multi-year lenses into like how to sort of really think through this. And as we sort of delegate authority even further and further down, but we sort of see the job market dynamic of the top job sort of almost going into like, are you all hearing states or other people starting to think about that challenge too, which is like, look, like a lot of the people right now we're relying on to potentially implement these strategic plans at the LEA level, a lot of them probably aren't going to be here in another 18 months just because of the revolving door of the role. Like, are you hearing those types of conversations?
Not exactly in those ways on my end, Terry. Maybe you have, but if I were, I think my response to that would be, don't plan for people, plan for systems, plan for impact, plan for outcomes. Because when we plan for people, like we know those people can leave, right? So I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
once we plan, make sure we have the systems, the processes in place to ensure that we can sustain these types of programs, and don't plan exactly for people. I think when I say that, an example of that would be, don't hire someone because they have the skill sets to teach this type of program. Hire someone you can train and then build their capacity, build their knowledge base, and those kinds of things. Make sure they have the supports in place. Make sure we're documenting all the types of supports. Make sure we're codifying all these processes, these coaching, all those kinds of things, so that folks can use them more long term.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jaalil. And I would say what I know we've been trying to push some of our network participants to really think about, and it's a struggle because systems don't do it well, education systems don't do it well, is this is an opportunity to abandon some things, right? What I think what would be a misstep is if the U.S. Department of Ed recedes and gives that control to the State Department of Ed, that they basically replicate what the U.S. Department of Ed was doing as far as the practices, policies, bureaucracy, but just created at the state level. That's the easier way to do it, right? But, Vinay, to your point, if they can start planning now for the possibility, you can actually start thinking about what are the tasks, reports, triplication of efforts, things that could actually be abandoned, but that's not a quick conversation, and that's not an easy process. And so instead we just stack things on top, right? And the ones that are being really thoughtful about the upcoming work are the ones that, if we're going to keep superintendents in jobs, something needs to come off the plate, right? We can't just say, congratulations, you get autonomy. That also means you're now doing 3 different jobs, right?
Right.
Could you
You're
imagine?
basically, right. I mean, it's insane, right? Like, I was in a chief academic officer role when ESSER came out. Somehow, me and our director of finance became the owners of ESSER funds. Like,
Right.
I'm
Right.
right.
You're like your own mini DOE at that point. Like you're like the hand of
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And we're trying to figure out, and we're filling out all these reports. At the same time, we're recreating learning at a virtual level. And I'm swabbing people's noses in the parking lot, right? Like, so it can be done. It's not sustainable. So you've got to figure out what can we abandon? And the fact of the matter is, a lot of these things are put in place because, you know, I mean, the U.S. Department of Ed exists because we want equity across our system, and equity is not the natural state of things, right? Like, you're talking to an ex-physics teacher. Like, the natural state of things is not for things to be even and balanced when there is an equity, right? And that takes energy and effort to actually shift the system. And so if that energy and attention is going to be gone, who's going to pick it up? And it can't be your superintendents if all of a sudden, if you're not taking anything else off their plate. Something is going to have to give there.
Real quick. Oh, go ahead, Vinay.
Yeah, just real quick. It's so my background. So I went to law school. So it's funny as you mentioned. So the idea of like what can we abandon and sort of things just sort of stack on top of it. It reminds me of so much around sort of like a big part of the reason why contracts are so complicated as they are today is because there's all this like vestigial language, right? Because like most contracts now are like you rinse and repeat, right? There's a document library at every law firm, and you sort of find the one that most closely resembles the situation that you're trying to draft a contract for, and you take that starting point and you go. But like what oftentimes ends up happening is like certain legal language is put in there, and then like the sort of institutional memory about why or exactly what that thing was trying to sort of protect against gets lost. But then there's a lack of courage or a lack of sort of willingness for like a junior or mid-level associate to go back to a partner and be like, do we still need this clause here anymore? Like then that maybe that junior partner is like, well, I'm not going to be the one to remove it. And then like all of a sudden, like somebody comes back and be like, well, why wasn't this clause in there? We have like, right. Like, and so like stuff
Right.
just gets added and never removed and things just get longer and more complex and more tedious. And then that's just another thing that has to get negotiated. Right. Like, so it's
Yeah.
just, I was just
Yeah.
thinking about that, like that analogy. It's like 100% true, right? It's just that like the, the conversation around what could we give up is not a that's not going to happen on its own. Like things won't
Right.
naturally just go away. That in and of itself needs to be an intentional conversation with people willing to be brave enough to like take the flack when sort of they start to get rid of things that other people may have a vested interest in keeping. Right. So sorry, Julie, go
And
ahead.
those are the types of conversations that we facilitate with policymakers across the country, right? How do you do that? We have a really unique opportunity to abandon these things. How do you have the conversation with your state leaders and your policymakers to get them on board to have those types of conversations? I think back to the COVID. Gloria Ladson Billings who talked a lot about the hard reset. She gave COVID the name of the hard reset. It was an opportunity for us to really rethink how we did education, particularly at the school level, like what does instruction look like and all of those things. But I think now is really a good opportunity to think about a hard reset for the education policy, right? If we're really at a juncture now where, like Terry said, we can choose to abandon things or continue to do them the way that we have. And if we don't have reasons if we don't have reasons to do the things that we do, we need to abandon them, right? So we have to think about how to have those conversations. And that's one thing that we're working with leaders across the country to think through. How do you have those conversations with your people?
I'll add to that too. So in our Path Forward network, we're focused on science of reading right now. We started off trying to help state departments of ed and their state legislatures and their governors figure out how to get legislation passed. Well, most states have science of reading legislation at this point, right? So now we've shifted that to a community of practice where we're trying to help state departments of ed really and their institutes of higher ed actually implement the law, because even the best law out there, best policy, if you're not supporting its implementation, there's no point. But the conversation about math is right around that corner, right? And so we've had some interesting conversations in that network because nobody wants to say I don't care about math, and nobody doesn't care, right? But there are some conscious decisions you have to make about, are we ready yet? And can I be brave enough to say, if we're going to focus on K-3 math also, those are the same teachers and the same principal that we're also putting all of this new, whether it's training or certification or anything like that, we're putting the same focus on. So we've had some really, quality, brave conversations about like, do we, some states are saying, okay, so we're going to focus more on sixth math right now, because at least when we're making that conscious decision, we're saying it's not the same people. It's not going to be the same part of the spectrum. We're going to at least challenge somebody else. And when we're thinking about math, some states have literally taken their science of reading legislation, did a Control F, replaced science reading with math, and are gonna go forward. And that's one way to go too. As a science teacher, I like that they're focusing on math, but your system's got to be ready. It's not abandoning anything, but it's also the idea that you can't add. You have to be really smart about your order of operations and your choices, and you can't overburden your system. Because what's going to happen is then the reading stuff will go out the window too when everybody's capacity is just completely at a loss.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you talk about that because like sort of this whole idea of like, we need to figure out what we can take away that exists at all levels. Like they're not only at the superintendent level, but you mentioned at the teacher level, at the educator level, to in the individual sort of classroom level too, which is like, I think one of the conversations that COVID has sort of brought to the fore, and I feel like now it sort of has been sitting behind the scenes a little bit, probably because of how intensely bad the teacher shortage is are we asking too much of our teachers to begin with? And like what sort of roles can we sort of help them walk away from so that way they can focus more on like doing more with sort of less roles, right? Like, because right now they're the teacher, they're oftentimes the counselor, they're the security force, right? Inside the building as well. there's like all these roles, and we have other roles out there that sort of take those on. But in some ways, it almost, and I'm risking entering into very like controversial territory here, but I see it somewhat analogous to a lot of this debate and discussion that happened during the sort of the peak of like the Black Lives Matter versus defund the police and the defund the police movements and other things like that, which is regardless of where you sided on that, one of the conversations that at least started to happen and then got sort of set aside is like, are we asking our police officers to play too many roles in the community? And so like, as a result, because they're being asked to do all these roles, it just makes things very murky and like increases the likelihood that like bad outcomes happen. Right. Same thing
And to
here.
be clear,
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry, the reason I laughed before is because I also had a Black Lives Matter like analogy going in my head. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But I think just to be clear, the things that we're asking teachers to do in terms of like being the supports for students and being instructional leaders in their classroom, that's not new. Like that's something that we have always been expected to do as teachers. I think some of the needs that, well, there are also more things. Let me be very clear. There are also more things, but the needs that students are having are far greater than what they have been before. So we're asking teachers to do the same things more frequently for students with more needs. And I think that there needs to be some conversations around that.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's the conversation about abandoning anything. There has to be something that's going to pick up the outcome that you want. So if you tell teachers, stop being the social worker, stop being the one who's going to take it, cool, hire a social worker then.
But what's going to happen?
Right.
Otherwise, I'm going to keep doing it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because
Otherwise, you're not going to have these kids don't have food.
Right.
Yeah, because like we also can't ignore the psychology of the person who goes into teaching, right? Which is like they went into
Right.
teaching to help and like make a difference in a kid's life. If they see a kid struggling, they're not gonna like go back to their job description on, on their HR website and be like, oh wait, no, that doesn't technically
hey,
fall
look,
under
kid.
my. Yeah,
Sorry.
that's not
Right.
really
Yeah.
my. Yeah, so they're gonna
Right.
help the kid.
But what
right?
they might do is go to their literacy lesson plan and say, I can't get to this small group today because I have to deal with this kid who's hungry
Right.
or a kid who's being
Right.
abused. So
Right.
then we have
And
to
so-
figure out, well, who's going to teach these small groups or who's going to deal with these students who have these other external factors that are impacting their education. So I think to bring it all back, like I think that these are the kinds of conversations that state leaders need to be having. Some of the students that we have can't read, but they're also hungry and they may be being abused or they're homeless. So both of those things need to be addressed simultaneously with the same amount of intervention and intensity. But who can do that? Teachers can't do all of that, right? So districts are going to have to start thinking about, and they have been, right? Thinking about how they can keep supporting teachers and other school staff and students to make sure that they're getting all of their needs met, academic, social, behavioral, all of those things with limited funding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I'll say one of the.
I don't think anyone's saying that. I don't think districts were naive. They all saw these challenges before, but going back to is now the new world is now the opportunity to come up with more innovative models of staffing and other things to address it differently, where maybe before, when a significant portion of its funding was sort of funneled through very, very prescriptive Title I, Title II, Title III programming, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of maybe did that restrict the innovation possible of how to go about addressing these challenges, right? So
Yeah. I would say one of the coolest conversations I got to listen in on in this role recently was, so the Hunt Institute recently started a mayor's fellowship, and we had our first meeting out in Fort Worth, Texas about a month ago. So mayors from all over the country. It's a cohort about 20 people, both sides of the aisle, small, large areas that they support. We had a really great conversation about like, what is your role in supporting K-12 education, right? So there was one person in the room who, in their role, the mayor actually is like the leader of the state board of education or that local board of education. But everybody else was like, I guess I can use my influence, but but it was this great conversation about, and I had recently read an article that like education can no longer itself be the great equalizer. We need a whole village. Like everybody's got to take their steps in there. And having this conversation with the mayors who are like, maybe it is an economic stimulus for you to support, your teacher workforce. Maybe it's creativity in a way that you're going to work with developers who are coming in, that they have to set aside a certain amount of their, housing for firefighters and teachers, things like
Right.
that.
Mhm.
But also, it is an economic imperative if you want the people in your area to be employable afterwards. And it was honestly you could see light bulbs going off on how these mayors could use their ability to get people in a room, because if nothing else that I've learned in this role, the answer's always in the middle. And that's not where anyone exists. And so you've got to get everybody there to then find that middle ground. Now, I used to joke with people during COVID times, like, I was in a district that was about 50 on their beliefs about everything. And someone was like, well, at least 50% of the people are happy all the time. I'm like, no, it means 100% of people are disappointed in what you did. So like the challenge is really getting people to be in that middle road to say, every answer's in that middle space.
Mhm.
Should we remove all the restrictions on how teachers should come in so we can build our workforce? No, because we also need an educated workforce, teacher supply line. And so the mayors, it was a very cool conversation about, it can't just be educators. It can't just be State Department of Ed people. And maybe with the U.S. Department of Ed stepping back, then maybe you have people in housing and urban development and your economic workforce development. And maybe you have people there starting to see education as their responsibility too, because there isn't a department that that is named the Department of Education, because it's got to be everybody else, and they've got to get in there to have parts of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a huge opportunity to take a step back and realize that we can't solve some of education's biggest problems by only focusing on education as the lens through which to solve it, right? Like the teacher shortage is in and of itself an affordability problem. And it's also an outgrowth, well, so, like it's an unintended consequence of one of the greatest like trends of economic mobility ever, which is like women now can pursue any career that they want. We have more women getting graduate degrees than men. We have, I think, more female presidents of universities than men now, or something like that. Something great. Like these are like incredibly good stats. Like it's the same reason why we have the nursing shortage, right? It's like because like so many women now, it's like, why would I go be a nurse when I can go become a doctor, right? If I care, I'm going to go into the healthcare field, right? The shifts are there, right? But then we also have this affordability problem. To your point, you said the fireman test, right? The fireperson test. Can a fireperson who's sworn to protect a given community afford to live in that community? I live in one where I could say flat out no because of gentrification, all right? But yeah, and so I do think that the mayor and the city and the municipality is one of those few sort of truly cross-functional sort of like roles left in that regard, right? Like in like because they have the enough, the locus of power still sits with enough different areas, whether it's housing, transportation, all that stuff. So yeah, I think you're 100% right that there's something really there around as the LEAs get more and more control and autonomy. That is does the mayor now become versus like the state superintendent and like the SEA and the governor, does the mayor now or like the surrounding mayors or the county or these people become the ones that the LEAs really start to look at? I had a great conversation with a superintendent, an elected superintendent actually out of Florida, Rick Cerency. He's in Putnam schools out in about 2 hours near Daytona. He's done some great work on moving up graduation rates up to over 90%, and some other things. Everything he talked about on the conversation was like deepening relationships with the community, with the employers of the community, you know, creating STEM pathways. They have like, I think one of the few like rocket free programs in high school, right? Because they're not
Mhm.
far from NASA there. So like there's like a mystique about it that they could capitalize on, right? And sort of all these different things. Uh, yeah, you sort of see this opportunity around K-12, the buildings of K-12 can become part of that workforce conversation, right? The transferable skill set of teachers, right? Right. Like we want to bring them in, but like we want to also show the community that like they are very viable candidates on the way out too. Maybe maybe part of the
Mhm.
problem is like with the retention thing is like, let's lean into it. Be like, look, do your 3 years of duty in your community. You'll get a great job coming out of it. And like that actually then increases the pipeline on the front end organically, right? Like where everybody sort of benefits. Yeah. I mean, I think the stats that we see is like, I think 60% of teachers still end up teaching in their hometown, right? So it's like one of the
Yeah.
few remaining workforce pipelines that actually is still local, right? And the other 40% usually end up teaching within 20 miles of the place where they graduated from their bachelor's of ed, if they went to a traditional
Mhm.
EPP, right? So like it's one of those networks that are still part of the community fabric, but I've definitely just started rambling, so I'm going to stop myself. And maybe shift gears, you know, we sort of touched on indirectly the data sort of thing. You know, in addition to coordinating, organizing, and implementing some of these sort of more intimate sessions and events that you all do, you know, off the record, closed door, you also, as an organization, do your own sort of surveying and data collection. Love to give you guys an opportunity to talk about that for a second around sort of, I believe there's one that just went into the field or is about to go into the field. So maybe talk about that.
Sure.
And I know that we're planning to do another conversation in a couple of months when some of that data comes out. So
Yeah, really excited about it. The survey is our across the aisle work. And it really came from the COVID constituency. So really looking at what voters, teachers, parents, likely voters are thinking about education. Because what we found is that a lot of times in the media and in politics, folks are the elected officials aren't exactly getting the messages out that voters think are important. The Across the Aisle project seeks to really understand what voters and those participants think are important around education. So it's asking different questions around what are your thoughts around this issue? How important are these issues to you? What different topics do you think policymakers should be thinking about on school choice, for example? What are your thoughts around vouchers or ESAs or charter schools? So, and this work really helps us plan and think about how we support states, but it's also something that we share and disseminate with policymakers and elected officials and candidates as they're starting to build their campaigns and starting to think about how they can support their constituents around topics in education. We did just deploy or deploying soon our survey, so we'll get that data shortly, and then we'll have a webinar on January 1st where we'll officially roll out that data to share with others. So excited about it, and can't wait to see what the data shows us this year.
Yeah, what I love in particular about the Across the Aisle survey, I mean, both at the policy level, and I mean, it goes all the way down to the people working in your schools. If we can help shine a light on the fact that we agree about way more than we disagree about, and those red meat issues that end up dominating the airways and news streams aren't as important to people as you would think if you're surveying the news or you're surveying. And as we've been talking about things to abandon, the amount of capacity dealing with those red meat issues that goes into an SEA or an LEA or a school principal, there's a thing to abandon right there. Like that's time and capacity. So if we can reiterate
Mhm.
like what people really care about, honestly, across the aisle is they want their kid, and I'm excited to see after a year since our last one, but our last across the aisle survey, I mean, they want their kids reading, they want their kids prepared for a workforce after you know, after graduation. They want a high quality teacher workforce, and they want those people to be, paid and respected. I mean, these aren't things that like we can all agree on that, but we get so distracted by the noise. And again, that noise takes so much capacity from our LEAs and our SEAs that can we please just focus on the highest priorities here and the things that really matter? And I think we've found in our work, that's what, whenever there is a contentious conversation, when you tell people like, aren't we all arguing about like good outcomes for kids? Isn't that,
Right.
can we agree on that? Then people tend to come back to the center and say, you're right. Like this is what's important. So I'm excited to see our survey results and see if if anything shifted since COVID. Obviously those years, that was not just a year or two. I mean, we're still coming out of the fog of all that. So
We're still
I'm
in it. Yeah.
curious to see if there is any shift of priorities or just focus or anything like that from our likely voters.
well, thank you for both for that. I think that's a great place for us to sort of wrap up. And I just want to say, to sort of tie it back to some of the things you both brought up at the front end of the conversation, I think the importance and role of organizations like the Hunt Institute, I think, are only going to become more important in this new
Sure.
climate. because I think when we sort of move into a world where data collection practices and other things need to happen and be sort of shared bottoms up and be shared almost like multilaterally in an opt-in model instead of an opt-out model.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations like yours, where you've already established that trust and you have those intimate and sort of personal relationships with key decision makers and aspiring future decision makers, only becomes that much more important. So I really appreciate the time today on today's show. And I'm very excited come January to do another one so we can go dive in real deep into the findings that you had from their for a cross-aisle survey. What we can also do is we can include, when you all sort of have a link and everything for an RSVP for that webinar, we can also send that around to our audience as well.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been
Take
great.
care. Have a great day and happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Take care. Cool.
Well, thanks for listening to Praxis Journeys. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone who would find this conversation helpful, feel free to share it with them. I'm Vinay Ganti, and until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep working toward the kind of change our students deserve.